One day, oceanographer Tom and his wife Julia and their 2 children, Cassie and Ben, embarked on a yacht trip through the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben focused on fishing and Cassie was engrossed in her gadget, Julia decided to take a swim. As she enjoyed the water, an unsettling feeling crept over her. Despite the calm appearance of the sea, she sensed something large and threatening nearby. At the same time, the yacht's instruments began malfunctioning, but Tom, too engrossed in fishing, dismissed it as unimportant. Julia's unease turned to panic as she suddenly started struggling to stay afloat. She cried out for help, but her family, preoccupied, didn't notice. The water seemed to pull her further from the boat, intensifying her distress. Finally, Tom heard her frantic screams. Alarmed, he took control of the yacht, steering it toward Julia. Without hesitation, he dove into the water to rescue her. With help from the children, they pulled Julia back aboard and managed to revive her. Tom scolded Julia for not informing anyone before entering the water, reminding her of his standing rule. Apologetic, Julia promised to be more cautious. The family moved on from the incident, ready to celebrate a special occasion: Ben's 13th birthday. Tom lit the candles on the cake, and everyone gathered to congratulate Ben, who was delighted with his gifts. Cassie captured the joyful moment with a group photo. Just then, Cassie received a call from her boyfriend. He mentioned a storm brewing on land, but reassured her that he was safe. Moments later, the connection was lost. Cassie informed her parents about the storm, but before they could react, the yacht jolted violently. Rushing to the deck, the family was horrified to see massive whale carcasses surrounding their boat. Tom explained that whales sometimes become disoriented during storms, but the rising bodies were now colliding with the yacht, endangering them further. Tom decided to investigate and dived into the water. When he returned, he was injured from a mishap with the propeller. Julia quickly stitched his wound while he explained that the yacht's shafts were damaged, likely due to a strike from one of the whales. With the engine compromised, their ability to sail was severely hindered. Cassie tried to re-establish communication, but there was no signal, and the radio was unresponsive. Tom assessed their resources, finding they had enough water for only 4 days. Despite their predicament, he remained hopeful, reasoning that they were on a shipping route and help might come. As night fell, strange glowing objects appeared in the sky, drawing closer to the yacht. Risking everything, Tom restarted the engine and maneuvered the yacht to avoid the falling debris. One of the objects crashed nearby, revealing it to be an Earth satellite. The engine finally gave out, and a fierce wind began to thrash the yacht. Instruments went haywire, and the terrified family retreated inside, donning life jackets and bracing for the worst. An eerie ringing sound soon filled the air, causing nausea and nosebleeds. Tom fired a flare, desperate for rescue, but his attempts were futile. The family endured a harrowing night, clinging to hope. When morning came, they were relieved to be alive, but discovered a massive hole in the yacht's side. Strangely, they were no longer afloat. Stepping outside, they were stunned to see that the ocean had vanished, leaving their yacht stranded on rocky terrain in what had become a vast, barren desert. Tom tried to comfort his family, explaining that such phenomena had occurred in Earth's distant past. He theorized that the poles had shifted, causing the sea to recede and humanity to suffer catastrophic losses. Stricken by the realization, Cassie retreated to the cabin, asking for solitude. Julia inventoried their supplies while Ben released colorful balloons, hoping someone might see them. Tom turned to the radio, sending out distress signals. To his astonishment, he received a response. It was from NATO, the captain of a small submersible. They had survived the disaster because they were deep underwater when it occurred. Despite their efforts, all communication systems are down, leaving the family with no hope of external rescue. Based on his calculations, NATO predicts that the sea will return in about a week, and it will be violent. He advises the family to find higher ground and remain there for safety. Julia immediately tells the children to pack their belongings, while Tom directly asks NATO if he can take their kids to safety. NATO explains that his submersible is very small. Sadly, his partner didn't survive, and he can only take one person. After much persuasion, Tom convinces NATO to take both children, providing him with their current coordinates. Tom charts a course on the nautical map and promises to meet NATO at the agreed location in a couple of days. The next morning, the family is nearly ready to set off. Stepping onto the deck, Tom notices a man and a dog approaching. He walks toward the man, greets him, and offers him water upon noticing his injuries. The man drinks the water but suddenly punches Tom in the face, which Julia witnesses. She rushes to help her husband, only to see the man stab Tom in the chest with a makeshift spear. The dog snarls at Julia, keeping her at bay. Frozen in shock, Julia realizes Tom cannot be saved and runs back to the yacht. The attacker chases after her, injuring her arm, but Julia manages to climb aboard. Hearing her screams, Cassie and Ben rush to her aid. Together, they barricade the cabin doors. Julia hides the children in a locker, handing Cassie a flare gun and instructing her to use it only as a last resort. The intruder relentlessly tries to break through the barricade and eventually succeeds. Julia hides in the bathroom and tends to her wound. Meanwhile, the attacker goes straight to the galley and hungrily grabs food. As he searches the yacht, Julia arms herself with a kitchen knife. When the man enters the cabin, Julia jumps overboard and hides under the yacht. The attacker peers through the hole in the hull but fails to spot her. However, his dog finds Julia, forcing her to kill it in self-defense. Hearing the dog's yelp, the man investigates and discovers its body. Julia takes advantage of the distraction, climbing back aboard through a porthole on the opposite side of the yacht. Unfortunately, she falls directly into the attacker's grasp. The man beats her, throws her onto a couch, and starts strangling her. Cassie, watching in horror, realizes it's time to act. She emerges from the locker and fires the flare gun at the intruder, hitting him and setting the yacht on fire. Julia orders the children to flee as she sneaks into the galley. Despite being injured, the attacker comes at her again, but Julia kicks him away, grabs their packed bags, and jumps overboard. Ben finds Tom's lifeless body and collapses in grief. Cassie runs to her father, sobbing over him, while Julia kisses her deceased husband goodbye. Spotting the attacker leaping from the burning yacht, she urges the children to run. Behind them, the yacht explodes, engulfing their pursuer in flames. The family flees across the rocky desert, eventually finding shelter in a canyon with a small stream. However, the water is salty and undrinkable. Cassie shares what little water they have with Ben, who refuses out of guilt, believing the attacker followed them because of the balloons he had released. Cassie echoes this thought, but Julia defends her son, insisting he meant no harm. She tells them to focus and prepare for the long journey ahead. As they prepare to move on, Julia spots the attacker in the distance, still alive and tracking them. The family picks up the pace. That evening, Ben discovers the carcass of a hammerhead shark and attempts to butcher it, but Julia sees the attacker closing in and orders them to run. They come across a field littered with toxic waste barrels from a long-submerged dumping ground. Despite the danger of contamination, Julia urges her children to keep moving, knowing the attacker is relentless. Weaving through piles of trash and debris left by humans, they press on, but Julia notices that Ben is severely dehydrated. She gives him the last of their water. Cassie, overwhelmed, breaks down and declares that survival seems impossible. Julia firmly tells her to stay strong, insisting they must keep going. Finally, they find the fuselage of a plane that had crashed into the sea long ago. Crawling inside, they take shelter and rest. As they sit in the wreckage, Julia pulls out the last family photo they took together. She tenderly recounts the story of her first meeting with Tom, which happened at her hospital, sharing a moment of bittersweet remembrance with her children. Tom had once been brought to the hospital with decompression sickness after a failed dive, which was where Julia first met him. Now, as the children mourn their father, they bid him tearful goodbyes. Later that night, Cassie hears a sound and steps outside the plane to sit quietly. In the darkness, the killer approaches, unaware that Cassie is serving as bait. As he moves to grab her, Julia springs from hiding and stabs him with a knife. At dawn, the family prepares to resume their journey, but discovers the killer's body has been scavenged, a chilling indication that something far more dangerous than humans prowls the desert. Pressing forward, Julia studies the map when Ben suddenly bolts ahead. Julia shouts for him to stop, but he reaches a salty puddle and drinks a few mouthfuls before Julia drags him back. Unfortunately, the boy falls ill. The family finds some discarded plastic chairs and uses them to construct a temporary shelter from the sun, resting within it. Suddenly, strange noises prompt Julia to step outside. Alarmed by what she sees, she quickly wakes the children, and they begin to run. Soon, they spot a massive ship surrounded by scattered containers and a few wandering survivors. Julia calls out to them, but the people, terrified, dash into a container and lock the doors, ignoring her desperate pleas for help. The family climbs onto a container as enormous crabs appear, wounding Julia's leg. From their vantage point, they watch in horror as the crabs breach a crack in the container's door and massacre those inside despite their frantic attempts to fight back. Julia ties a scarf around her injured leg and collapses from exhaustion. By morning, she awakens alone and panics, calling out for the children. Thankfully, it turns out the crabs have moved on, and Cassie and Ben had ventured down to search for food and weapons. Julia cauterizes her wound while Ben sorts through their finds. Searching the containers, they discover a small supply of food and water. Julia also finds a radio on one of the deceased and manages to contact Natto. Natto replies, revealing that he, too, was attacked by deep-sea arthropods. He warns that the sea will soon return, which is why the creatures have emerged. Julia pleads with him to save her children, but admits she's lost the map. Natto fires a flare, and Ben spots its direction. The family sets off toward it, though the seabed's rugged terrain makes the journey arduous. As they push forward, they're forced to traverse a canyon tainted with toxic waste. While navigating the treacherous landscape, a rockslide separates Julia from her children. She urges them to keep moving, but when Cassie hesitates, Julia begs her to protect Ben. Cassie and Ben escape the canyon and reach the submarine, only to find it empty. Suddenly, Natto, gravely injured, emerges from behind the vessel. He admits he won't survive and insists they board the submarine immediately. But Cassie refuses to leave without her mother. She rushes back to find Julia battling the crabs with her ammunition nearly gone. Cassie climbs the rocky barrier, extends her hand, and pulls her mother to safety. They reach the submarine just as the crabs overwhelm Natto, who succumbs to their claws. The family climbs aboard, and an enormous wave appears on the horizon. The water crashes over the landscape, lifting the submarine and carrying it across the rocky seabed. As the chaos unfolds, Julia's mind flashes through the events of the past few days before she loses consciousness. When she awakens, the submarine is motionless. Julia opens the hatch, and the family emerges to find themselves in a decimated city, deposited there by the wave. Though the story had a compelling premise, the film ultimately fell short due to numerous errors made by its creators. For more videos, subscribe to Cine Recaps.